Ooh. My heart's pounding. Behind me is a 3,700 square foot slab where I'm about to start building myself a 2,900 square foot workshop. To say I'm nervous is an understatement, but on the same hand, I am beyond excited to get this going. Of course, as I always do, I'm bringing the camera along to document the process. So over the next few months, you're going to witness as this thing comes together. Don't pay any attention to the tire tracks. It's just me having some fun before the work began. Months before construction started, I spent lots of time in SketchUp playing around with different ideas, sizes, and layouts. A big contributor in the planning stage was my buddy and fellow YouTuber Jay Bates. One of the things he helped with was throwing in model tools that I currently have and plan to have so that I could really get a feel for how the space fit. I decided on a 40 by 72 foot space, but also included a 12-foot covered patio running the long side of the shop so that I'll be able to work outside whenever the weather permits. The shop is going to be divided into two so that I could have a woodworking space separate from my metalworking space. Each space will also have its own bay leading to the covered patio, then one bay door that goes in between the two. And before you ask, no, I am not sharing the space. I actually offered to build Cody an automotive bay on the other side of the metal shop, but he opted to stay in the attached garage. The only portion of the build that I hired out was the slab. It was an amazing operation that was completed in a single day. The shop portion is nice and smooth, while the patio portion is slightly angled at 1 degree for water runoff and has a broom finish. I was actually out of town at an event called FabTech whenever they were doing the pouring, but Cody was home and he took my logo, stamped it into the concrete so that everybody knows that the space is mine. Yay! The slab cured for roughly 2 months as I prepared to jump into this huge undertaking. I hired a drafter to work up a set of plans for my building to work off of. And I thought it was really cool. I provided these plans to a local lumber supply company, and they provided me with a takeoff or a breakdown of all the material needed to complete the project. I also ordered all of my engineered trusses through this company and scheduled everything for delivery at the start of January. Originally, I was planning on tackling this project on my own, but my friend George Von Driska, who's been a woodworker his entire life and has many years of construction experience, offered to come to Texas. I mean, probably because it was negative 22 in Wisconsin, and give me a hand for a week. Since I went with 12-foot walls, the first task was to cut all needed studs to length. This was around 250 2x6s that needed to be cut. And this got off to a really rocky start as I dropped one of these said studs on my foot and broke my toe. Yow. Thankfully, my neighbor is a nurse and brought me some dinosaur tape to buddy tape it and gave me a prescription of steel toe boots.
Steel toe boots would be a really good.
To cut all of the studs, my first thought was to throw each individual board up on a miter saw with a stop block and just get to cutting. I utilized my Portamate miter saw stand with its folding wings and adjustable side feed table, as well as a 12-inch Hitachi sliding miter saw. If my building were smaller, then this method would have worked just fine. However, it only took a few cuts to realize that this was going to take way too long. So instead, we would bring out 10 studs at a time and butt them up against a temporarily placed board, clamp them together, and use a circular saw to cut all 10 at the same time. And while still time consuming, it did go a lot quicker. With the studs cut, next was to start laying out the walls. We started with the west wall as it doesn't have any doors or windows, and George started teaching me the ins and outs of framing. We would mark the layout along the bottom plate, which is pressure treated, then transfer the mark to the top plate at the same time. Even though we would only frame a 16-foot section of wall at one time, we actually laid out the entire 72-foot wall up front. After the entire wall was laid out, each board was labeled and marked and then set aside while we actually worked on framing one wall section at a time. And framing. What a blast. I have never been more beat up in my life, but I absolutely loved it. I wised up on day 2 and started wearing knee pads, which made a big difference at the end of the day. Also, battery operated nailers, an absolute time saver. I personally use the Hitachi cordless framing nailer and love not having a cord to mess with. I definitely think it's worth the investment if you are going to be doing a project to this scale. It was powerful, effective, and it made life easy. On that note, the 12-inch sliding saw also made life easy, especially when making the headers, which require 2x8 and 2x10 material. It was our goal for the first day to have 2 wall sections built and stood up. However, the day was really slowed down because George kept having to take time to explain to me what to do and why. Basically, he was teaching me about framing as we were framing. Then you put in 3.
2 there. And then 3 in the middle. 2. 3. 2 in the middle one. 4 in the bottom one.
I did catch on quick though. The next day I didn't need my hand held as much and things really started moving. George and I were able to work more independently, still tackling the same wall but able to divide up the task. And before we knew it, 5 sections of walls were built. We very quickly got into a system for building these walls. We would first do the basic framing, putting studs on 16 on center, framing for doors or windows, etc. Then squaring the wall by using the 3-4-5 rule. If the wall was a corner wall, then it received inlet bracing, where a 1x was placed diagonally on the outside face of the wall, making sure that it hit the top plate as well as the bottom. This brace was recessed into the studs so that it set flush. Then, since my walls were so tall, every single one of them got horizontal support members called blocking at 4 and 8 feet up. And let me tell you, the framing goes quick. It's the blocking that really slows the process down.
I'll be glad when this blocking is done.
Yeah. But on that note, something that really kept the framing moving as quickly as it did was having my dad at the miter saw cutting all of this blocking that was needed. And then having Cody dedicated to the circular saw cutting all of the shoulders and cripples needed. So if you have a similar project, then definitely try to find a few extra hands. It definitely makes a difference. And then finally we started standing up the walls. Seal was laid down first to sit between the wall and the slab. I used a few small dabs of Titebond construction adhesive along its path to keep it from blowing around before the wall was actually set on top of it. Lifting up the first wall into place was surreal. Building the walls was cool, but setting them into place was extremely exciting. After getting the first one stood up, I did what I imagine any carpenter does after standing up the first wall. I gave it a hug. Don't lie. I know you hugged your first wall. Immediately after setting the first wall, we moved to setting the second into place, putting in the wall perpendicular to the first to help support it. After getting each section set into place, I would come through with a corded hammer drill to go through the base plate and into the concrete for the anchor bolts. After breaking through the base plate, George would make sure that it was still flush with the slab, and then I would continue drilling into the concrete. I drive an anchor bolt in using a 3-pound hammer to make it a little bit easier, then tighten down on the nut. And an anchor bolt was placed every other bay. Then it was really just rinse and repeat. We would grab a hold of another section, set it in place, set anchor bolts. After the anchor bolts of each section were put in, I'd shimmy up to the top plate and immediately nail on the doubler. This second top plate is intentionally placed so that it spans over 2 sections of walls, which gives the wall strength and stability. We ended the night by lifting a section of the partition wall that will be dividing the wood shop from the metal shop into place, and this will help support those erected walls overnight. The next day we started off by building more sections of wall to erect, and at this point we were getting really comfortable with what we could handle, what the machine could handle, so we started building larger sections of wall to stand up at once, which not only moved the process along quicker, but it was also a spectacular sight to see. Once a new section was stood up and the anchor bolts were driven in, we would also set a few temporary braces that would go from the wall to a stake that was driven into the ground, making sure that the wall was plumb before setting these braces. You can see George on the level as I'm driving the nails into this brace. Sections with a bay door opening in it, we would use a temporary scab board across the bottom to keep it rigid while moving it into place. With any of the man doors, we just let the bottom plate run across the opening while framing. Then, once the wall was in place, I came back to cut it out. We also did this when combining 2 16-foot sections together, even if there was no opening. We temporarily scab across the seam at the bottom and the top so that it wouldn't separate when being lifted into the air. And we used hammer and nails instead of a framing nailer on these to make removing these boards after the fact easier. Setting in this last wall section to the partition completed all of the framing required for my shop. It took us working sun up to sundown 4.5 days to get to this point. It was so much hard work, but of course I don't mind that. I absolutely loved every moment of it. Well, except for that broken toe bit. I could have done without that. You know, it's almost been an exact year to the week that I signed off from my previous shop. I was sad that I was leaving that space, but excited about the prospect of getting to build my new shop. And here I am, a year later, actually breaking ground on it. This experience has been exhausting. It's a lot of hard work, but man, am I happy I'm doing it. I've loved the learning process of learning from somebody who can just feed me the information. I know that I'm doing it right, and I'm just soaking it up like a sponge. Watching it all come together, making it happen. There's been nothing like this. I've never felt more empowered than building this building. I'm gonna continue filming the entire process, so if you're interested in watching the rest of this shop come together, then be sure to stay tuned. Next up, we'll be setting trusses and putting a roof on her. So leave me your comments, let me know what you think about my new space, and for the very first time, I am signing off from my new shop.
I'm happy for you.
Thanks.
I'm really proud of you.
Thank you.
It's been a lot of hard work.
It is. Oh, but it's so freaking